They said it would only be fair if my sister got to walk down the aisle first, in a wedding dress, on my wedding day. My parents sat me down and said those exact words, dead serious, as if they were offering me the greatest gift in the world. Their reason, because she wasn't married yet, and as the older daughter she deserved to have the experience before me. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they expected me to agree. They expected me to be grateful, to smile, sit back, and let my entire wedding turn into her fantasy. But you know what I did? I smiled. I nodded. I agreed. And from that moment on, my husband and I started planning something they'd never forget. We let them pay for everything. The venue, the food, the dress, the flowers. We gave them the illusion of control. Let them think they were getting their way. We even let my sister believe she'd be the star of the show. But on the wedding day, the doors didn't open for her. She screamed. My parents begged. The guests whispered. And us. We stood at the altar watching it all unfold. If you've ever been treated like the afterthought in your own family, or if someone's ever tried to steal your moment, stay with me. Because this isn't just a wedding story. This is the moment I got my life back. And I made sure they paid for every second they stole from me. Let me tell you exactly how it all went down. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 30 years old, a graphic designer living in Oregon, newly married to the most patient and brilliant man I've ever met. I'm the youngest of 2 daughters. And if there's one truth I've known since I could speak, it's this: I was never the favorite. That title was reserved, no engraved, for my sister Rachel. 3 years older, always louder, always in the spotlight. It's strange what memories cling to you, the ones that never quite fade. I was 10 when I truly realized it. It was during a family birthday gathering at my grandmother's house, a modest 2-story home that always smelled like cinnamon and mothballs. My sister, 13 at the time, had brought along a drawing, a simple pencil sketch of a tree, the kind with uneven branches and a little sun peeking out from behind it. She'd made it in homeroom that morning. As soon as she held it up, the room erupted with praise. My aunt gasped, my mother clapped, and my father went so far as to say, "You've got real talent, honey. We need to frame this." The drawing was passed around like a national treasure. Meanwhile, I sat quietly on the arm of the sofa, a neatly folded piece of paper clutched in my hand. I'd spent the better part of 3 days writing a birthday poem for Grandma. 6 stanzas carefully rhymed, decorated with pressed flowers I'd glued on the corners. When I tried to share it, my father gave me a distracted smile. "That's nice, Emily. Why don't you go help Aunt Janice with the lemonade I did?" I always did. That moment became the blueprint for my childhood. Rachel the star could do very little and still be praised to the heavens. I, on the other hand, could pour my whole heart into something and barely earn a nod. It wasn't just that day. Rachel always got the new clothes, new dresses in pastel colors, skirts with matching bows, shiny patent leather shoes. I got the hand-me-downs, often ill-fitting, sometimes stained. If I ever complained, my mother would say, "We're just being smart." Rachel only wore that twice. Even our school lives were measured differently. Rachel, who regularly scored C's and forgot her homework, was still called our little genius by my father. I brought home straight A's and was told not to brag. "Emily, you're supposed to do well," my mother would say. "You're the quiet one, the responsible one." Somehow my achievements were expectations and hers were miracles. But nothing summed it up better than the day Rachel decided to play wedding in our backyard. She found an old white sheet, and my mother, delighted by the idea, spent the afternoon cutting and sewing it into a makeshift gown. Rachel strutted around like a queen, and before I knew it, they had set up folding chairs, hung streamers from the apple tree, and invited neighbors over to watch the ceremony. My dad even played music on the portable radio. Rachel held a bouquet of dandelions. I held the trash bag. I had been asked to pick up the snack wrappers after everyone had gone. I remember watching her twirl on the grass, her arms stretched wide, laughter echoing like bells. I wanted so badly to be part of it, to be noticed, to be loved with that kind of attention. So I did the only thing I knew, worked harder. I cleaned the whole yard, wrote a thank you note to my mom for the beautiful party, and spent the next week trying to earn back some sliver of recognition. But recognition never came. That's when I began to understand that love in our house had rules. Rachel was the sun and I was the shadow she cast. And no matter how bright I tried to shine, I was always dimmer in their eyes. It didn't make me angry, not yet. Back then, I still believed I could change it. If I was good enough, smart enough, helpful enough, they'd see me. They'd love me like they loved her. So I kept trying. I made my bed every morning. I stopped asking for new things. I helped with chores without being asked. I memorized scripture verses and recited them at dinner. I got awards at school and taped them up on the fridge myself because no one else would. And through it all, I smiled. That was my job. To be the good one. The easy one. The daughter who didn't make waves. But even the quietest child sees the truth eventually. Even the most obedient heart begins to bruise. I didn't know it at the time, but that birthday party, that moment on the sofa, was the first crack in the foundation. The first time I looked at my family and felt like a guest in my own home. The first time I wondered, what if being good isn't enough? That question followed me for years. And though I buried it under achievements, under silence, under forced smiles, it never really left. Not until I stood on the edge of my own wedding day and realized they hadn't changed. Not one bit. But I had, and that changed everything. I was 11 the first time I realized that being overlooked was no longer just a feeling, it was a pattern. After that afternoon when Rachel played the bride and I cleaned up her confetti, I spent the next year trying to convince myself that maybe it was just a phase. Maybe next time my poem would matter. Maybe the way my teachers spoke of me with pride would eventually filter into the walls of my own home. But instead, the silence got louder. One Saturday morning, the kind where the air still carried the cold breath of winter, I came downstairs to find my parents standing at the kitchen table holding Rachel's pink wallet. Crumpled dollar bills peeked out from the sides. My father was rubbing his temples. My mother was glaring at me. "Emily," she said, not with accusation, but with expectation. "Do you want to tell us something?" I blinked. "What money's missing from your sister's wallet?" "A 20 and 2 fives, my father said. She says she left it on her dresser last night." I didn't take anything. I said it calmly, even though my stomach was turning cold. Rachel stood by the doorway, arms crossed, mouth curled in an expression of forced pain. "It's fine, Mom. Maybe she just needed it and didn't want to ask." I looked at her confused. "I didn't touch your wallet. It's just money," she said again, almost saintly. She probably meant to pay it back. That was the brilliance of it. She never outright accused me. She laid the path and let them walk it on their own. I stood there barefooted on the tile watching the trust drain from their faces, not in anger, but in disappointment. That was worse. My father said, "We're not mad. We just want you to be honest." There was nothing to confess. But my denial made me look guilty. My allowance was quietly cut for 2 months. I was told, "When you're ready to talk, we'll listen." Rachel never mentioned it again. It didn't end there. The following month, I was invited to the movies by a girl in my class, the first real friend I'd made since the start of middle school. I was excited. I had saved up for popcorn. But when I asked permission, my mother frowned. "Rachel wasn't invited?" "She doesn't know her," I explained. "I don't think it's appropriate," my mother replied. "Sisters support each other. It's not fair to leave her out." Rachel from across the room feigned a shrug. "It's fine. I wasn't really interested anyway." But I saw the smile in her eyes. She'd won. Again. I stayed home that night helping my mom fold laundry while Rachel watched TV in my room. That was the night I found an old notebook in the back of my drawer. It had once been for school multiplication tables and half-finished spelling lists. I tore out the used pages and began writing. Not poems this time, not birthday letters, just truth. January 12th, Rachel lied. Again. She said I stole from her and they believed her. I didn't cry, not on the outside. I filled 5 pages that night. It was the first time I didn't bottle it up. The act of writing became a quiet rebellion. If no one would listen to me, at least I would. It wasn't long after that when Aunt Marlene came to visit. She was my mother's younger sister by 8 years, with cropped auburn hair and laugh lines that never quite faded. She wasn't around often, but when she was, the air seemed to shift. She noticed things. At dinner, she asked about school. I answered. Rachel answered louder. When Rachel told an exaggerated story about how she saved a failing group project by herself, I bit my tongue. I'd been in the same class. I knew the truth. But what was the point? Later that evening, while I cleared dishes, Aunt Marlene walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. She watched me rinse a plate and said softly, "You've gotten quiet, Em." I shrugged. "I'm just tired." She didn't push. She never did. But as she dried a dish beside me, she added, "You know, when I was your age, your mom was the golden one too." I looked at her, startled. She was perfect in everyone's eyes. I was the backup act. I know what that's like. She smiled gently, then handed me the towel. "I see you. Just so you know." It was the smallest thing, but it cracked something open inside me. Not hope, at least not fully, but awareness. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. Someone saw it too. That night I wrote again, this time in cursive, like I was writing a letter to the girl I wanted to become. January 28th. I'm not invisible. Not entirely. Aunt Marlene saw me. But I was still in that house, still following rules written in someone else's handwriting, still wondering if love was a currency I simply couldn't afford. My room felt smaller that night, though nothing had changed. The walls were the same soft blue, the posters the same. My reflection dimmed in the window glass was still mine, but I stared at it and whispered just to hear the sound of my own voice. "You're not the problem." I didn't believe it yet, but I was beginning to. Aunt Marlene's words stayed with me longer than I expected. In the days that followed her visit, I began watching things more closely. People, patterns, silences. I had always believed my family's rules were fixed, universal, but now I realized they weren't rules at all. They were just walls carefully built, and I'd been told never to question them. At school, I had one bright spot. Sarah. She wasn't loud or flashy like Rachel's friends, but she was the kind of person who noticed when your shoes were soaked from walking in the rain, and she'd offer you her spare socks without making it awkward. We weren't popular, but we had each other, and in middle school that was everything. We spent our lunches in the art room sketching or reading or just sitting in companionable silence. I never had to explain myself to her. I could laugh without watching my tone cry without apology. It was the first friendship that felt like home, and perhaps that's why Rachel couldn't stand it. It started with little things. One afternoon, Rachel passed me in the hallway smirking and said, "Heard your little weirdo friend likes to steal markers from the art room." Another time, she told our mother casually over dinner that she'd seen Sarah talking back to a teacher. "People like that are trouble," she added, stabbing her peas. I didn't think much of it. Rachel had always had a cruel streak, but I should have known better. Because the following week my parents sat me down in the living room. "Emily," my mother said, folding her hands like a news anchor preparing to deliver bad news, "we need to talk about the people you're spending time with." I blinked. "You mean Sarah?" My father spoke next, his voice calm but condescending. "We've heard some things. From Rachel. And from others. She's not a good influence. Talking back to adults. Skipping class." "She doesn't skip class," I protested. "She helps tutor other students. We don't want to argue my mother cut in. We just want what's best for you. And right now, your association with her could affect how others see our family." There it was. Not concern for me. Not even concern for Sarah. Just the family image. I tried to reason, to plead, but it was no use. The verdict was handed down. I was not to see her outside of class. No lunches together, no calls, no texts. "You'll thank us one day," my mother said, patting my knee. "You're better off." That night, I locked my bedroom door, pulled out my journal, and wrote until my wrist ached. I wrote everything I wished I had said. How Sarah made me feel safe. How she listened when no one else did. How cruel it was to lose someone twice, first to distance and then to silence. And then, just days later, Sarah moved. Her father had gotten a job out of state and they left quickly. She told me in a hushed whisper behind the lockers that it wasn't goodbye forever, but I knew better. When you grow up in a house where affection is conditional, you learn to stop expecting permanence. I hugged her tightly, trying not to cry. She handed me a small, folded note. Inside it said, "Don't let them tell you who you are." After she left, the halls felt colder. I ate lunch alone. Rachel and her friends laughed louder than usual, as if to fill the space Sarah had occupied in my life. I became a ghost, again, present, but unnoticed. Heard only when needed, seen only when useful. One evening, unable to hold it in, I called Aunt Marlene. I didn't plan to cry, but the moment she answered, I couldn't stop. I told her everything, how they'd turned my one real friend into a problem. How Rachel always twisted things, how my parents never questioned her lies. She didn't interrupt. She let me pour it out. When I finished, she said quietly, "Emily, you are not crazy. You are not wrong. And you are not alone. I'm here. No matter what." Her words were simple, but they wrapped around me like a blanket. I hadn't realized how cold I'd become until that moment. We stayed on the phone for nearly an hour, just talking about book, school, anything but Rachel. Before hanging up, she added, "Write it all down. When the world won't listen, paper will." So I did. Every night I turned to that notebook. Not just to vent, but to remind myself of who I really was. I began recording things that mattered, the books I read, the words that made me feel something, the quiet victories I had in class. It wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about preserving myself. But still, there was a growing emptiness I couldn't ignore. Without friends, without Sarah, without the safety of being believed, I began to question more than just my family. I questioned my worth. If the people who raised me could discard my feelings so easily, maybe I really wasn't enough. Maybe I was forgettable, replaceable, invisible. And yet each entry in my journal pushed back against that voice. Slowly. Not with declarations or grand affirmations, but with gentle truths. You matter. That was the sentence I wrote the most. By the end of that semester, I had no friends, no social life, no voice inside that house. But I had pages filled with my truth. I had Aunt Marlene, and I had a flicker of something else resolve. One night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I whispered to myself, "This isn't forever." I didn't have a plan yet. I didn't know how I'd get out. But for the first time, I believed I had to. Not just to escape, but to become someone who didn't ask for permission to exist. Thanksgiving that year was held at Aunt Denise's house, a sprawling ranch-style home on the edge of town with oak trees that had turned every shade of amber and rust. It was the one time of year when extended family gathered without obligation or tension, at least for most of them. For me, it was a brief escape, a place where the eyes watching me weren't always measuring my worth against Rachel's. I hadn't planned to say anything. I never did. But as the afternoon wore on and the grown-ups clustered in the living room balancing paper plates on their knees and discussing politics and pies, I found myself sitting on the back deck with two of my cousins, Laura, who was a year older than Rachel, and Josh, who was a college freshman home for the break. There was something about the soft murmur of distant conversations and the smell of turkey still lingering in the air that made me feel unusually safe. Laura was laughing about how her mom made her bake the rolls from scratch as punishment for forgetting to RSVP. Josh was scrolling through photos on his phone. When Laura asked about Rachel, I offered a non-committal shrug. "She's inside," I said, probably telling everyone about how she saved her entire chemistry class from failing. Josh smirked. She's still doing that thing where she turns everything into her own personal victory speech. That made me laugh probably harder than I should have. And maybe that's what cracked the shell. Without fully intending to, I started telling them what life was like at home. Just small things at first, how Rachel got a new iPad last month for needing it for school, while I still shared a cracked one from 2 years ago. How I cleaned the entire house before guests came over, but Rachel got credit for keeping things tidy. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't embellish. I just told the truth and let the pieces speak for themselves. Laura frowned. That's not okay. Josh leaned back against the railing. They actually punish you for things she does. I nodded. She's the golden one. She always has been. I've kind of learned to stay out of the way. Laura exchanged a glance with Josh. Neither of them said much more, but the way they looked at me had changed. There was no pity, only understanding. I didn't think much of it again until after dinner when the adults were cleaning up. I heard my name clear and sharp and looked up from where I was scraping plates. It was my mother's voice. Emily, can I speak to you now? She pulled me into the hallway near the laundry room where the chatter of the house was muffled by the hum of the dryer. Her eyes were hard. My father stood beside her, arms crossed. What did you say to your cousins? My mother demanded. What? Don't play dumb, she snapped. Denise just asked me if we've been treating Rachel differently. Did you tell them we're unfair to you? I just told them the truth, I said quietly. My father stepped in. You embarrassed us. On Thanksgiving, you're lucky we don't tell everyone what you've really been like. What I've been like. I repeated, stunned. We will not tolerate lies, my mother added. If you can't keep private matters in the family, then maybe you don't need to be part of family events. That night when we got home, I was told I wouldn't be attending Christmas with the extended family. You've shown you can't be trusted, my father said. You need to think about your actions. I spent the holidays in my room listening to Rachel gleefully announce her plans for New Year's and watching the decorations go up without me. No one called. No one asked where I was, except for Aunt Marlene. 2 days after Christmas, she showed up unannounced under the pretense of dropping off a late gift. It was a small silver necklace with a delicate pendant, a tiny compass. So you always find your way, she said, pressing it into my palm when my parents stepped into the kitchen. I barely managed to keep the tears in. She leaned in and whispered, I heard what happened. Laura told me everything. And I believe you, Emily. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, swallowing hard. You don't have to fight them now, she added, but you do have to know the truth. They won't change. So you have to focus on building something that's yours, your own future, one they can't touch. Later that night, I held the necklace in one hand and my journal in the other. I wrote for hours not about what they had done, but about what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, who I wanted to be. It was the first time I wrote about something bigger than survival. There was power in that. Even though I remained trapped in that house, even though the punishment lingered and Rachel's smirks remained unbearable, I knew someone out there saw me, believed me, and better yet, was waiting for me on the other side. Something shifted after that Thanksgiving, not just in me, but in Rachel. At first I thought I imagined it, an edge in her voice that hadn't been there before, or a twitch in her jaw when I entered a room and didn't immediately lower my eyes. But over time, the mask began to slip, and beneath it I saw something I hadn't expected: uncertainty. It all began at one of the bigger school parties of the year, a birthday celebration for a girl whose father owned a local chain of car dealerships, and whose guest list was more curated than a debutante ball. Rachel had secured an invite, of course, and she made a grand performance of preparing for it, trying on 3 different dresses, borrowing heels from a friend, insisting on using my curling iron even though she'd mocked it just the week before. She left the house in a cloud of perfume and entitlement. She returned 2 hours later in silence. I was in the kitchen getting water when she stormed in and yanked open the fridge with such force the magnets shook loose. Her face was pale beneath her heavy makeup, her eyes rimmed in red, though she hadn't cried. I didn't ask what happened, but I didn't have to wait long to find out. Monday morning, the halls at school buzzed like they always did after a party. Only this time, Rachel's name wasn't being whispered with admiration, it was being laughed at. Apparently, she'd spent the entire evening boasting about a summer trip to Paris, with our family down to naming boutiques she supposedly visited and restaurants she dined in. The problem, one of the other girls had also been in Paris that summer, and she had the receipts, literally. Rachel had never gone to Paris. Our vacation that year had been 3 days in a budget motel near the lake where the air conditioner broke, and we lived off gas station sandwiches. When the truth came out, the laughter was merciless. And worse, no one confronted her directly. They simply moved on, inviting her less, speaking to her in clipped tones, pretending she was part of the wallpaper. At home, though, Rachel spun a different story. She claimed the other girls were jealous, that she'd been the victim of petty gossip, that she was above their cruelty. Our parents didn't even question it. Within days, they had arranged a transfer to a private prep school in a nearby district. She deserves a better environment, our mother said. A place where her brilliance is nurtured, not attacked. But I saw through it. Rachel wasn't brilliant. She was unraveling. She spent more time at home now, holed up in her room, obsessing over her appearance, deleting and reposting the same photo multiple times on social media. Her followers dropped. Her comments dwindled, and her smiles in photos started to look rehearsed. And then, something else happened. She started watching me. It was subtle at first, small glances across the dinner table, the way her eyes flicked toward my homework, or the way she paused when I mentioned a test score. Then came the comments. "You know, Emily," she said one evening as I packed up my books, "you must be exhausting to be friends with. All that studying. Do you even talk about anything fun?" I ignored her. The next day she saw me reading on the porch and said, "You really think those books make you special? No one likes a know-it-all." It went on like that. Snide remarks delivered with a sugary tone. A constant need to remind me that no matter how well I did in school, she still outranked me in look, style, and social grace, even if no one else seemed to believe it anymore. But what she didn't know was that I had stopped caring whether she outranked me. What mattered now was how I felt about myself. And for the first time in years, I was starting to like the girl I saw in the mirror, not because she was winning, but because she had survived. I documented everything in my journal. Every comment. Every moment Rachel flinched when someone praised me. Every time she tried to undermine me and I didn't react. I wasn't collecting ammunition. I was collecting clarity. The truth was, Rachel had been crumbling long before that party. The image of her as the flawless, untouchable sister was always a carefully curated illusion propped up by our parents, supported by favoritism, and protected from consequences. But when the outside world began to see the cracks, she didn't know how to cope. And I, quiet, invisible, second-best Emily, was suddenly a threat. That realization didn't make me smug. It made me careful. I kept my head down. I said nothing. I let her try to rattle me with her insults, and when she failed, she got quieter. Not because she was done, but because she was watching, waiting, trying to figure out why I didn't break like I used to. But I wasn't the same girl anymore. I still lived under their roof. I still followed their rules. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer wanted their approval. I wanted something they couldn't give me. Autonomy, self-respect, a future that belonged only to me. And I was starting to believe I could have it. By the time I turned 17, I had grown used to carrying secrets. Not dramatic ones, the kind you see on television or read about in books, but quiet secrets. The sort that sit in your chest like a stone, heavy and invisible to everyone else. One of those secrets was Tom. Tom wasn't like the other boys at school. He was calm where others were loud, sincere, where most were eager to impress. We met in biology class, where he once offered to carry my dissection tray when he saw my hands shaking. It wasn't romantic at first. It was slow, careful. Two people quietly noticing each other in a world that rarely noticed them. He didn't care that I wasn't popular. He liked that I was thoughtful, that I read poetry, that I cared more about books than parties. We started walking together after school. Then there were coffee shop study sessions that turned into actual dates. Eventually, he asked if he could call me his girlfriend. I said yes. For a while, Tom was the first thing in my life that was wholly mine. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't need their permission to feel happy, and I already knew what their reaction would be. Rachel had boyfriends, plural. But somehow, if I so much as mentioned liking someone, it would be inappropriate or distracting. So I kept it quiet. But Rachel found out anyway. She saw us together one afternoon when Tom walked me home from the library. She didn't say anything at first, just raised her eyebrows and smirked as she walked past us on the front steps. I should have known that smile meant trouble. 3 days later, Tom stopped replying to my texts. The calls went straight to voicemail. When I finally cornered him after class, he looked away. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't think we should keep seeing each other." My heart dropped. "Why? What happened?" He hesitated. "Look, I don't want to get into it. But I thought you were different, Emily. It didn't make sense. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't even said anything unusual." But then he pulled out his phone. "I saw these," he said quietly, scrolling to a series of messages. The texts were from my number. Or rather, they looked like they were. They said things like, "I'm just using you to get back at my sister and don't take it personally. I'm not even into you like that." My stomach turned. "I never sent those," I whispered. Tom looked at me uncertain. "Then how did I get them from your number?" I didn't have an answer. But in that moment, something inside me cracked. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just walked away. It took me days to find out the truth. Rachel had borrowed my phone a week earlier to look something up while we were in the living room. I hadn't thought twice about it, but I should have. That night when she was out, I logged into the family desktop, an old machine in the study we all had access to. Rachel always forgot to log out of her cloud accounts. There, in a drafts folder, were the messages she had sent to Tom using a text spoofing app. There was even a note she had written to herself: "Tom will be gone by Friday." LOL. I stared at the screen for a long time. The next morning, I showed my parents. I laid it all out, the fake texts, the proof, the pain. My father skimmed the screen and shrugged. "That's between you girls," he said. "Maybe you shouldn't be dating anyway." My mother didn't even look up from her coffee. "You're too young to get serious with boys, Emily. And besides, Tom clearly didn't care that much about you if he believed something so easily." Rachel didn't deny it. In fact, she smiled. "Maybe next time pick someone who likes you enough to ask questions." That night I sat in my room staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could survive in a house where cruelty was brushed aside and love was conditional. I opened my journal and wrote everything down, every lie, every silence, every betrayal. At the bottom of the page I wrote something I'd never dared to put into words before. They will never protect me. They will never value me. I have to get out. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was Aunt Marlene. I just had a feeling, she said, her voice warm but firm. "Tell me what happened." I broke. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry. Not quietly into a pillow or in the shower where no one could hear, but fully. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened. "You didn't deserve that," she said when I finally ran out of words. "And I hope you know, just because someone calls themselves your family doesn't mean they act like one. You are allowed to choose better." It was the first time anyone had given me permission to want more. In the weeks that followed, I buried myself in schoolwork. I applied to college programs I hadn't dared to dream of before. I stayed up late researching scholarships, grants, anything that could help me escape the life I'd been handed. Rachel still tossed her smug little jabs my way. My parents still treated me like I was too fragile for the world, but I had something they couldn't see resolve. I wasn't just working toward grades anymore. I was building a future they couldn't sabotage. One where love wasn't a weapon and trust wasn't a trap. I had lost my first love, but I was done losing myself. In the weeks that followed my breakup with Tom, I tried to disappear into routine. I studied harder than I ever had stayed late in the library, even when I wasn't assigned anything, and walked the long way home just to avoid the possibility of running into Rachel. My goal was simple: stay small, stay quiet, and stay out of her way. But Rachel wasn't satisfied with silence, not when she could turn it into a show. The first whisper reached me in the hallway by my locker. I was grabbing a textbook when two girls walked past one of them, laughing too loudly. She's the one who texted her boyfriend she was just using him, then slept with his best friend, right? I turned heart pounding, but they were already gone. At first I thought I had misheard, but then it happened again. In the cafeteria, in gym class, in the girls' bathroom. My name became a stain passed from one gossip to the next like a cheap secret, and the story grew each time. By the end of the week, according to the rumors, I'd cheated on Tom with two boys, bragged about it, and laughed behind his back. There were no screenshots, no messages, just words. Words were enough. Rachel had poisoned the well. I knew it was her. I didn't have proof, but I didn't need it. This was her pattern: wait, watch, and then strike when no one was paying attention. She didn't need to be loud. All she had to do was plant a seed. High school did the watering for her. The worst part wasn't the names I was being called, or the way boys I didn't know suddenly felt entitled to smirk at me like I was available. It wasn't even the teachers who started watching me more closely as if I were trouble. No, the worst part was the shift in my own friends. They stopped sitting next to me. They didn't invite me to lunch. Texts went unanswered. Eye contact was avoided. And when I did approach them, their smiles were tight, brittle, like they were afraid of catching whatever label had been slapped onto me. One afternoon, I overheard my lab partner say to another girl, "You know, I always thought she was too quiet. Those are the ones you have to watch." I was 17. I hadn't even kissed anyone besides Tom. At home, I hoped for comfort. I hoped for someone to believe me. Instead, my mother stood at the kitchen counter, hands on her hips, and said, "You've embarrassed us." I looked up from the table, stunned. "I didn't do anything." "You must have done something," my father added, not looking away from the newspaper. "Girls don't get reputations like that for no reason." I felt the familiar heat rise in my face, not from guilt, but from the sheer weight of injustice. I had been lied about, betrayed, and now blamed for defending myself too quietly. Rachel walked by just then, humming under her breath, her ponytail swaying like she had nothing in the world to worry about. "You owe your sister an apology," my mother continued, "for dragging her into your mess. The least you could do is admit when you've made a mistake." That broke me. "I will never apologize to her," I said, my voice low but shaking. "Not for lies," she started. "Not for what I didn't do." My father folded his newspaper slowly and looked at me like I'd said something obscene. "You may be book smart, Emily, but you've got a lot to learn about family." He walked out of the room. My mother didn't say another word. That night I skipped dinner and locked myself in my room. I opened my journal and wrote until my wrist ached. Every sentence was a release, a declaration, a promise to myself. I wrote about Rachel's cruelty, about my parents' silence, about how the people who were supposed to love me first and most had instead chosen to believe the worst. Then I wrote something I had never written before. Not about pain, not about anger, about the future. I listed colleges. I wrote down application deadlines. I made a budget for what I'd need to survive my first year away. I researched scholarships and programs for students with financial hardship. I called them by name because I was done pretending I didn't qualify. Later that week, I printed out 3 applications and mailed them without telling anyone. And when the house was quiet, I sat at my desk, turned to a fresh page in my journal, and wrote only one sentence: "I will be free." It didn't feel like revenge. not yet. It felt like survival. But sometimes surviving is the most radical act of all. For every step I took forward, there seemed to be an invisible hand pulling me 2 steps back, and that hand more often than not wore my parents' wedding bands. I had thought that after the storm of rumors and whispers at school, things at home might quiet down, maybe even shift. I was foolish enough to believe that getting through all that ugliness with my head held high would earn me some measure of respect. But I underestimated how deep their favoritism ran. Rachel had never been a stellar student. Her grades were average, her effort minimal. She coasted on charm and excuses, turning every missed assignment into a joke and every bad test score into a funny anecdote. When she brought home a report card littered with B's and even the occasional C, my parents celebrated as if she'd just been named valedictorian. "See, she's improving," my mother beamed, pinning the report card to the fridge like it was a work of art. All she needed was time. A week later, I got back a biology exam, a rare low mark, just a D on one test out of dozens I'd aced all year. I'd been sick the night before, exhausted from working on scholarship applications in secret. When I handed my paper to my father, he frowned. "This is disappointing," he said flatly. "You've been slipping lately." It didn't matter that I had straight A's in every other class. It didn't matter that I was in advanced placement, that I was aiming for universities none of them had even dreamed of. 1 D on one test was enough to erase all of it in their eyes. Rachel's mediocrity was seen as progress, my excellence was seen as expected, and anything less was failure. At home, the contrast was even more glaring. By senior year, Rachel was staying out late with barely a word. She'd breeze in after midnight on weekends, smelling of perfume and cheap beer, and no one blinked. Once I asked my mother if she knew where Rachel had gone. "She's almost an adult," she said without looking up from her magazine. "She doesn't need to check in anymore." But I did. I had a hard curfew, 9 p.m. sharp. Not 10, not 9:15. 9. If I missed it, I was grounded for a week. Once I got home at 9:03 because the bus broke down, and my father waited at the door with a watch in his hand and a look that said he was ready for battle. Rules didn't apply to Rachel. They were designed for me. Then there were the chores, the never-ending thankless chores. Every afternoon I swept the kitchen floor, wiped down counters, folded laundry, scrubbed bathroom tiles, cooked dinner. I did it all without complaint, hoping perhaps stupidly that consistency would one day be recognized. Rachel. She never touched a dish. My mother always made excuses. She needs time to study. She has a lot on her plate. She's going through a stressful week. One evening, I came home from a long shift at the campus library, an after-school job I took to save for college, and found a pile of dishes stacked in the sink. My back ached and my eyes burned. I looked around the kitchen, saw Rachel lounging on the couch watching TV, and I lost my patience. "Could you wash a single plate?" I asked her. She rolled her eyes. "I'm busy." My father entered the room, heard my tone, and barked, "Don't talk to your sister like that. If you have a problem, handle it maturely." So I did. I stopped speaking altogether. That night, I opened my journal and recorded everything: the grades, the curfews, the chores, the silence. I gave each page a date, a title like a case file. I imagined it all as evidence for a trial that might never come, but in writing it down, I felt sane, validated, seen if only by the future version of myself. And in one of those late-night entries, I finally put into words what I had been too afraid to admit. They will never change. It wasn't anger I felt, it was acceptance. The clarity of it startled me. I could no longer waste time hoping for fairness. I had to fight for freedom instead. The next morning, I pulled my laptop from under my bed, booted it up before the house woke, and began refining my college applications. I created a spreadsheet of deadlines. I listed required documents. I mapped out scholarship opportunities like they were escape routes. Then I called Aunt Marlene. Her voice, as always, was a balm. "Don't wait for them to give you permission, Emily," she said after I poured everything out. "You don't need it. You never did." I told her I didn't even know where to begin. "You've already begun," she said gently. You just have to keep going. And I would. Every double standard, every unfair rule, every insult disguised as concern. They were bricks in the wall I was tearing down piece by piece. I wasn't just applying to college. I was writing my exit, drafting my liberation, crafting the version of myself that no one else had ever bothered to believe in. The girl who left would not be the girl who stayed, and they wouldn't see her coming. College had always been my escape route. It was the promise I whispered to myself during late-night chores, the light I clung to through years of silence and second-place status. I didn't dream of ivy-covered buildings or bustling campuses the way most kids did. I dreamed of a door one I could walk through and never have to come back. And for a time, I believed I was almost there. Senior year was winding down, and acceptance letters had started rolling in. I'd gotten into 3 of my top schools, 2 with partial scholarships, 1 with a competitive academic award that covered nearly half the tuition. It wasn't enough, but I had saved what I could. I had a plan, and I just needed one thing to fall into place: my parents' financial support. That was the agreement after all. Years ago, they had promised to help both Rachel and me with college. It was something they told relatives often and proudly. "We're investing in our girls," my mother would say. "Education is everything." That was back when they still pretended fairness mattered. But fairness had long since gone out the window. We were sitting at the dining table when they told me. My acceptance letter to Brighton University lay open in front of me, the words, "Congratulations," still bright and crisp. I had rehearsed the conversation in my head for weeks, even printed a spreadsheet showing tuition books housing everything. I thought maybe, just maybe, presenting facts would matter. It didn't. "We can't help you with college." "Emily," my father said without hesitation, not even glancing at the paper. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. "We spent most of what we had on Rachel's school," my mother added. "Private high school tutoring art programs. That wasn't cheap, and she needed it more." "She flunked out of half of it," I said before I could stop myself. My mother's eyes narrowed. "That's not the point." "So, that's it." My voice cracked. "I did everything right. And now there's nothing left. You've always been the smart one." My father said like that was supposed to be comforting. "You'll figure it out." I didn't cry. Not there. Not then. I nodded, folded the acceptance letter back into its envelope, and went upstairs with my heart in my throat. 3 days later, the letter came. It was from a private student loan provider I'd never contacted. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but as I skimmed the lines, my pulse began to race. My name, my social security number, my address. A loan totaling over $42,000 had been approved, signed, processed, and active. I hadn't applied for it. It was for tuition, housing, and fees at a different university. One I had never considered. One Rachel had briefly attended. I called the number. I asked questions. The representative verified the email used for the application. It matched the one my parents always used for school forms. The pieces snapped into place, one after another. They hadn't just refused to help me. They had used my name, my credit, to fund Rachel's failed education. They had stolen my future before I even had a chance to touch it. I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter trembling in my hand. For a moment I wanted to scream, to storm downstairs and confront them, to demand an answer, an apology, a shred of remorse. But I didn't, because I knew what they'd say. "You should be proud to help your sister. You're too emotional. You'll understand when you're a parent." I didn't need another argument where I was painted as ungrateful. Instead, I folded the letter neatly and slid it into the back of my journal behind the pages labeled Evidence. That night, I stayed up until 2 a.m. applying for emergency aid and writing scholarship essays. I researched credit repair options, student rights, and financial fraud laws. I opened a new bank account in a different institution, one they didn't know about. Every click, every typed sentence, every envelope I sealed was a quiet declaration of war. They wouldn't see it coming. But I was done playing their version of the game. Later that week, I called Aunt Marlene. I hadn't told her about the loan before. I hadn't wanted to burden her. But now I needed to tell someone. Someone who would believe me. There was a pause on the line after I finished speaking. Then softly she said, "That's illegal, Emily, and unforgivable." "I know," I whispered. "But if I make a scene, I lose." She sighed. "Then don't make a scene. Make a plan. Stay smart. Stay quiet. And win." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't write. I didn't even pace. I just sat in the dark and pictured a future where they couldn't reach me. And I promised myself I would build it brick by brick, lie by lie, until I was free. The envelope arrived on a gray morning in early March, buried beneath college brochures and utility bills. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another letter from another admissions office. But when I opened it and read the first line, the breath left my body. "Congratulations, Emily Grayson. We are pleased to offer you a full scholarship to Wexley University." For a moment, I just stared at the words. Then I sat down, placed the letter on my lap, and cried not from sadness, but from the kind of relief that only comes after years of being told you'd never make it without them. I didn't tell my parents right away, not because I feared their reaction, but because I wanted to hold that moment for myself untouched by their bitterness. I wanted it to exist in a quiet, private place where they hadn't already left fingerprints. Later that evening, I crafted a social media post. It was carefully worded, designed not for honesty, but for optics. So grateful to my parents for their constant support and sacrifices. I'm beyond honored to receive a full scholarship to Wexley University. I couldn't have done this without your love. A lie, every word of it, but a necessary one. Within hours, the comments rolled in. "You must be so proud of your daughter, such a strong family." What an accomplishment Rachel and Emily both raised, right? My mother commented with heart emojis. My father shared the post with a caption about hard work and blessings. I watched them put on the performance like seasoned actors. They had no choice now. They couldn't admit the truth without unraveling the facade they'd worked so hard to build. And that was the point. They would have to keep pretending. To friends, coworkers, family, to themselves. Rachel, of course, couldn't stay quiet. 2 days later, she posted a photo of herself in a cocktail dress captioned, "Some people play the victim for attention. Others just live." She didn't tag me, but everyone knew who she meant. The comments were mixed. A few vague sympathies. 1 or 2 people trying to diffuse the tension. But then something unexpected happened. One by one, her old friends began to reply. "Didn't you drop out of college? Weren't you the one who took your sister's money? This is not the flex you think it is." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her own words were undoing her. For once, I wasn't the one defending myself. The truth was speaking louder than I ever could. Aunt Marlene called me that evening. She had seen the posts, heard the rumblings from other relatives. Her voice was warm, steady. "I put a little something in your account," she said softly. "It's not much. Just a small gift. For your books or your new sheets. Whatever you need." I tried to argue, but she cut me off. "This isn't charity, Emily. It's justice, and it's overdue." I checked the account later that night. $500. Not a fortune, but more than just money. It was proof. Someone believed me. Someone saw me. I used the money to reserve my dorm at Wexley. I picked out bedding in shades of soft blue and gold. I ordered a used copy of a psychology textbook from the university bookstore, even though classes wouldn't start for months. I needed the physical reminder, this was real. This was mine. Each day after that, I began preparing to leave, not just physically, but emotionally. I stopped waiting for fairness. I stopped hoping they'd apologize. I gave up trying to make Rachel like me, or my parents see me, or the past be anything other than what it was. My rebellion wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, it didn't come with screaming matches or slamming doors. It came in the form of a quiet, confident choice. To go. To build a life beyond their reach. To reclaim the name they'd spent years turning into a burden, and wear it with pride. Emily Grayson, Wexley University class of 20XX. No one had handed it to me. I'd bled for it, scraped for it, earned it in every way that mattered. And now I was taking it all with me. Freedom wasn't a moment. It wasn't an announcement or a goodbye note. It was the soft, deliberate closing of a door behind you, and the steady steps you take after that forward, always forward. The road to Wexley was long lined with golden trees and a sky so wide it made the world feel full of possibility. I watched the scenery pass from the passenger seat of Aunt Marlene's old sedan, my suitcases stacked in the back, my acceptance letter folded neatly in my lap, like a ticket to a new life. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. When we crossed the state line, I looked out the window and whispered to myself, "It's real now." Aunt Marlene reached over and gave my hand a quiet squeeze. She didn't need to say anything. Her support had always come in silence and actions, not empty words. I moved into the dorms 2 days before orientation. My roommate Olivia was chatty and warm, the kind of person who decorated her side of the room with fairy lights and little affirmations. We didn't become best friends overnight, but for the first time I was in a space that felt neutral. No judgment, no Rachel, no hierarchy built on lies and favoritism. Just me and a room of my own. I limited contact with home. I didn't block anyone I wanted to be better than that, but I muted group chats and let calls go to voicemail. Rachel texted once a passive-aggressive line about how some people just run away when things get hard. I didn't reply. By October, the silence had grown permanent. No birthday card from my parents. No holiday plans. Just quiet. And peace. Meanwhile, news trickled in from Marlene. Rachel had dropped out of college halfway through her first semester. No one in the family was surprised, except maybe my mother, who insisted Rachel just needed a mental health break. She moved back in with our parents, spending her days lounging around the house while my mother defended her potential to anyone who would listen. She hadn't gotten a job, she hadn't gone back to school. But she still had the best room in the house, the car, and my father's unconditional praise. Some things it seemed would never change, and yet everything had changed. At Wexley, I began to build a life. I joined the Women in Leadership Club not because I saw myself as a leader yet, but because I wanted to be around people who did. I signed up for a student-run podcast, quietly volunteering behind the scenes editing audio. Every Tuesday, I attended a roundtable on ethics and social systems, where I finally felt like my opinions mattered. Slowly, I started speaking up. Slowly, I stopped apologizing before I did. For the first time, I wasn't navigating someone else's shadow. Aunt Marlene called every Sunday evening. It became our ritual. We talked about classes, the strange weather, the ridiculous prices of campus meals. Then one evening, her tone shifted. "You know," she said, "your mother, she wasn't always like that. When we were younger, she adored Rachel the moment she was born. It was like the rest of us faded into the background. I don't think she even realized it." I sat quietly, letting her words settle. I had long suspected this, but hearing it from someone who had seen it unfold gave it weight. She wanted Rachel to be everything she wasn't. Marlene continued. "And when you came along, it was like she'd already written the script for the family. You were always the understudy." I felt tears prick the back of my eyes, not from sadness, but recognition. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it. It had a name, a history. "Do you think she regrets it?" I asked, barely above a whisper. There was a pause. Then Marlene said, "Maybe not yet. But one day she will, because you're not standing still anymore." That night I sat by the window of my dorm, the campus quiet beneath a blanket of early winter. I opened my journal, the one I had carried since I was a girl, scribbling through pain, and flipped to a fresh page. I didn't list what had been taken from me. I didn't write about Rachel. I didn't write about my parents. I didn't write about loss. I wrote one sentence: "I am no longer Rachel's shadow." I underlined it, once closed the book, and slid it back into my desk drawer. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Somewhere down the hall, music played softly from a neighboring room, and in that moment, surrounded by nothing more than my own breath and the pulse of something new, I felt it. Freedom, quiet and unshakable, mine. The rhythm of campus life had begun to settle into something steady. Between classes, study sessions, and the quiet hum of evenings spent journaling in my dorm, I felt like I was slowly stitching together a version of myself that wasn't defined by Rachel or my parents. I was learning who I was when I wasn't constantly defending myself. It was in that quiet process of becoming that I first met Jason. It happened in a seminar on social psychology, a course I had chosen because it fascinated me to study how people behaved in groups and families. The irony wasn't lost on me. The professor had divided us into pairs for a project, and I found myself seated next to a tall, composed young man with dark hair and a calm, observant expression. He introduced himself simply Jason. There was nothing showy about him. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. When he spoke, it was thoughtful, measured, like he chose each word with care. That alone set him apart in a room full of students eager to dominate the discussion. Over the weeks, our project meetings shifted from academic to personal. He asked questions not in a prying way, but in a way that made it clear he wanted to understand. And for the first time in years, I found myself answering honestly. One evening, as we worked in the library, he asked about my family. The question made my chest tighten, but something in his steady gaze urged me to trust him. So I told him. Not everything at once, but enough. Enough to paint the picture of a girl who had lived in shadows, who had been told over and over that her worth was conditional. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said, "I know what that feels like." My mom grew up in a family like that. Her brother could do no wrong, and she was always the afterthought. Even when she worked harder, achieved more, it was never enough. She left home at 19 and never went back. He smiled faintly. She says it was the best decision she ever made. For the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider telling an unbelievable story. I felt seen. Jason didn't dismiss my words or offer shallow comfort. He simply let them exist. We started spending time together outside of class. At first, it was practical coffee before a study session, a walk across campus when the evening air was too crisp to ignore. But slowly, those small moments became their own kind of ritual. He would carry 2 cups of coffee, one with just the right amount of cream, and hand one to me with a half smile. We would sit on a bench near the fountain talking about books, professors, music. Nothing extravagant, nothing forced, just simple companionship. I had always thought relationships had to be dramatic to be real, that love was a battlefield because that's what I'd grown up seeing. But with Jason, it wasn't like that. It was quiet, steady, equal. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't treat me like I was broken. He just walked beside me, and somehow that was enough. One night, as we sat in the campus cafe long after the other students had left, Jason leaned forward. His voice was gentle but serious. "Emily, have you ever thought about facing them? Not to argue, not to change their minds, just to close the door properly." The thought made my stomach twist. I had worked so hard to distance myself to finally breathe freely. The idea of willingly walking back into that storm felt unbearable, and yet part of me knew he was right. You can run from the past, but unless you face it, it waits, lurks, shapes you in ways you don't see. "I don't know if I could," I admitted. "What if they try to pull me back in? What if I lose everything I've built?" Jason shook his head. "You won't lose it. You've already proven you can survive without them. Facing them isn't for them, Emily. It's for you. So you can walk forward without looking back." His words stayed with me long after we left that night. They echoed in the quiet moments, in the lines of my journal, in the way I stared at my own reflection in the mirror. He wasn't asking me to forgive them. He wasn't asking me to return. He was asking me to finish what I had started, to not just escape, but to claim my freedom fully. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of it alone. Jason didn't just give me hope. He gave me the strength of someone who believed in me without condition. I had always imagined love as fragile, something that could be taken away at the whim of others. But this was different. This was a partnership, a hand steadying me as I stepped onto unfamiliar ground. And yet even with Jason by my side, fear lingered. I worried that seeing my parents again would unravel me, that Rachel's voice could still cut me down, that the years of cruelty had left scars too deep to face. But beneath the fear was something else, a glimmer of resolve I hadn't felt before. The sense that maybe with Jason's support, I could walk into that confrontation and walk out stronger. That night, I opened my journal and wrote one line: healing is not forgetting. It's facing the wound and refusing to let it define me. Then I closed the book and sat in the quiet, letting myself feel both the fear and the possibility. Jason had given me something precious. Not just love, but the belief that I could write the ending to my own story. I wasn't sure when or how I would confront my family, but I knew this much: I wouldn't be doing it alone. The autumn sun was soft that afternoon, filtering through the trees with a golden glow that made the world seem gentler than usual. Jason had insisted on taking me out for a picnic in the park near campus, and though I suspected nothing beyond a quiet afternoon, I noticed he was more deliberate than usual. He laid out the blanket with care, unpacked sandwiches and fruit he had prepared himself, and even brought along a small thermos of my favorite tea. It was ordinary in the way only something precious can be, free of spectacle, full of thought. We talked about classes, about the latest book he was reading, about the crispness of the air that signaled winter's approach. And then, when the conversation fell into a comfortable silence, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He simply looked at me with steady eyes and said, "Emily, I want us to build a life together. Will you marry me?" The ring inside wasn't flashy, a slim band of silver set with a modest stone that caught the light in a way that was both quiet and certain. It wasn't wealth he was offering, it was permanence, partnership, and choice. For the first time, I felt that love wasn't something given on conditions or withdrawn at whim. It was something we were both choosing. I said yes, the word trembling on my lips, and when he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a calm I had never known settle inside me. This wasn't the kind of romance that burned like fire only to fade. This was something that could last. But joy was quickly shadowed by hesitation. I thought of my parents, of Rachel, of the way every good thing in my life had been twisted into something painful by their interference. Even as Jason held me in that moment, I felt a chill of dread. Telling them meant giving them another chance to break what I had just begun to build. For a while, I kept the engagement private. My closest friends on campus celebrated with me. Aunt Marlene cried with happiness over the phone, and I let myself imagine a future untainted by the voices of those who had tried so hard to diminish me. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and it wasn't long before my parents reached out. They called first, then emailed, then left messages that grew increasingly insistent. When I finally picked up, my mother's tone was unusually warm. "We heard the news," she said. "Congratulations. We'd love to meet Jason." It was the friendliness in her voice that made me wary. They had never shown kindness without motive. I couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath the surface. Did they hope to charm him? To convince him I was exaggerating the past? Or worse, to drive a wedge between us? Jason listened as I relayed the conversation, his expression thoughtful but not surprised. "We'll meet them," he said simply. "But on our terms. And we won't go in unprotected." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He pulled out his phone and set it on the table. "We record everything. Every word, every suggestion, every manipulation attempt. They can twist your memories, but they can't twist a recording. If they want to play games, we'll make sure we're the ones holding the cards." The idea unsettled me, not because it was wrong, but because it was so foreign. For years, I had been the one caught off guard, blindsided by accusations I couldn't disprove. Now Jason was offering me a way to turn their tactics back on them. It felt like stepping onto unfamiliar ground, but necessary ground. I agreed, though part of me still wrestled with doubt. "I don't want them to poison this." I whispered, glancing down at the ring on my hand. I don't want their shadows on our happiness. Jason reached across the table and covered my hand with his. They can't poison what they don't control. We'll meet them once set the record straight, and then you'll never have to wonder if they're waiting in the background. We'll close the door properly. His confidence steadied me. For so long I had lived at the mercy of their moods, but now I was preparing to face them not as a frightened child, but as a woman with her own future. Still, the thought of sitting across from them again made my stomach knot. I could already hear Rachel's derision. My mother's passive-aggressive barbs, my father's dismissive tone. I could already feel the sting of old wounds threatening to reopen. That night I sat with Jason on the small balcony of my apartment. We didn't speak much. He simply held me while I looked at the stars, the weight of what lay ahead pressing against the peace of the evening. I knew that seeing my family again would not be easy. I knew it might even be painful. But I also knew this: I was no longer walking into that room alone. In my journal I wrote, "Tomorrow I begin the hardest chapter. I am afraid, but I am also ready." And with that I closed the book and allowed myself for the first time in years to face the thought of my family with something more than fear. I faced it with resolve. The restaurant was one of those polished places where the silverware gleamed and the staff spoke in hushed tones, a setting chosen carefully by my parents to create the illusion of respectability. I sat across from them with Jason by my side, the ring on my finger, a quiet reminder of the future we had chosen. The clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation around us did little to ease the knot tightening in my chest. I knew this wasn't a meeting of reconciliation. It was a stage, and my parents had come prepared to perform. At first, the conversation stayed shallow. My father asked Jason about his studies. My mother complimented the cut of my dress, and Rachel, ever eager for attention, recounted a story about being admired at a social gathering. I nodded politely, keeping my face neutral. But my instincts screamed that something larger was brewing beneath the surface. Jason, calm as ever, played his role with ease, listening intently, smiling at the right moments, offering nothing that could be twisted later. He was the picture of composure, and I leaned on that steadiness as I braced myself. It was my mother who shifted the tone. She set her fork down, folded her hands, and fixed Jason with a look that was both rehearsed and expectant. "There is one thing," she began, her voice measured, as though she were offering a favor rather than delivering a blow. "We've been talking, and we feel there is a tradition we must honor at Emily's wedding." I stiffened, the air in my lungs suddenly heavy. Tradition was never a word used kindly in my family. It was a weapon sharpened and wielded whenever they wanted their will to appear righteous. "What tradition is that?" Jason asked, his tone, even though I could see the faint narrowing of his eyes. My father leaned forward. "It wouldn't be right for Emily, the younger sister, to walk down the aisle first. Rachel deserves the experience too. She should have her moment. She should be the one to walk first in a wedding gown, as a sort of bride of honor." My fork slipped against the plate, the scrape loud enough to draw a glance from the next table. I felt heat rise to my face, disbelief burning in my chest. A bride of honor. They weren't just asking for a role in the ceremony, they were demanding my sister be given the moment that was supposed to be mine. They wanted her in white walking before me, photographed, as though she were the one being celebrated. My wedding was to be her rehearsal. Rachel smirked, clearly delighted by the shock on my face. "It only makes sense," she chimed in. "I've always been the pride of this family. Everyone knows it. I shouldn't have to wait for my turn when Emily is the one rushing into things. This way, it's fair. I get the recognition I deserve." I wanted to laugh, to scream, to remind them all of the years of lies and cruelty, the debts taken in my name, the futures stolen without remorse. But the words caught in my throat. They were so brazen, so unashamed, that for a moment I was paralyzed by the audacity of it. Jason broke the silence. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and let his brows lift in a show of surprise. "That's a lot to ask," he said carefully. "You're suggesting Rachel walks the aisle in a wedding dress before Emily?" Yes, my mother replied, as though it were the most natural request in the world. It will bring balance. It's the only proper way. I turned to Jason, searching his face, my heart pounding. This was the moment. This was where it could all collapse. And then, to my shock, he nodded slowly. I understand. If it means keeping peace in the family, I'm willing to consider it. Rachel beamed triumphant. My parents exchanged satisfied glances, as though a great negotiation had been won. In their eyes, Jason was pliable, the kind of man who could be bent to their will. They thought they had gained an ally. They thought they had cornered me. But then Jason's hand brushed lightly against mine under the table, his thumb pressing once against my skin, a silent signal only I could read. When I met his eyes, I saw it, the flicker of calculation, the spark of strategy. He wasn't yielding. He was baiting. Relief and resolve surged through me all at once. They believed they had triumphed, but I understood now what Jason was giving me a chance to turn their own absurdity against them. This wasn't just another slight to endure. It was an opportunity. Their demand was so outrageous, so grotesque in its selfishness, that it could be the very rope with which they hung themselves. I forced my breathing to steady, forced the tremor from my voice, and said nothing more that evening. Let them think they had won. Let them leave the restaurant smug and satisfied. Because Jason and I both knew the truth, we had just been handed the weapon we needed. Later that night, as we walked back to the car, Jason finally spoke. You saw it too, he said. I nodded. They've given us their plan. Then we'll make it ours, he replied, his hand tightening around mine. In that moment, the fear I had carried for years shifted into something new. I was no longer just bracing myself for their cruelty. I was preparing to strike back. Their outrageous proposal meant to humiliate me would be the key to their undoing, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to play their game and win. When Jason and I left the restaurant that night, the cool air felt sharper than usual, as if the world itself had overheard the conversation and was recoiling in disbelief. I walked beside him in silence, replaying every word my parents and Rachel had spoken, their smug certainty ringing in my ears. They believed they had won. They believed Jason had bent to their will. But as soon as we were out of earshot, Jason looked at me with a small, knowing smile. We'll give them exactly what they asked for, he said, and make them regret it. The first rule of our plan came easily: nothing in writing. No texts, no emails, no scraps of paper that could be photographed and twisted. We would discuss everything face-to-face or over calls that we controlled. It felt strange to think of myself as a conspirator, but for once I was no longer on the defensive. I was playing the game on purpose, and that shift alone sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Jason played his part with uncanny skill. He scheduled a meeting with my parents under the guise of hashing out wedding logistics, making sure Rachel was present. Over coffee at their house, he leaned back in his chair, gave a show of hesitancy, then sighed like a man reluctantly giving in to pressure. If it's that important to the family, he said, then Rachel should have what she needs. A dress, a photographer, whatever makes this right. But you understand, I can't justify all that expense on my own. It wouldn't sit well with Emily. If you truly want this, you'll need to take care of those costs up front. The hook was baited, and they swallowed it whole. My father nodded solemnly, as though accepting some noble responsibility. My mother looked triumphant, as if Jason's words confirmed her long-held belief that she could manipulate any man attached to me. And Rachel was radiant. She immediately began listing designers she wanted for her dress venues for a photo shoot, florists known for extravagant arrangements. Her greed made the trap effortless. The more she demanded, the more they committed themselves. Within weeks, money began to flow. Deposits were placed on a high-end bridal boutique, a photographer with a portfolio that looked like it belonged in glossy magazines, catering tastings that included the most expensive menu items. Jason accompanied them to several appointments, always careful to frame his presence as reluctant support, not leadership. I just don't want Emily to know too much, he would murmur conspiratorially. She might get cold feet if she thinks Rachel's role is overshadowing hers. That line alone kept them eager to handle everything directly, further excluding me from any proof of their schemes. Meanwhile, Aunt Marlene became my quiet ally in the background. Though she didn't know every detail, she had her suspicions, and she never hesitated to share information. One evening she called after visiting my parents' house. They were gushing about Rachel's fittings, she said with thinly veiled disgust. "Your mother actually said, 'This will finally give Rachel the attention she deserves.' Emily, they're too blinded by favoritism to see what's happening." Her voice softened. "Be careful, but don't lose heart. They're setting themselves up, and you're smarter than they realize." Each update fueled me. For years, I had been the one caught in their traps, the one accused, the one without defense. Now I was watching them build their own cage, bar by bar, and step inside without hesitation. It was surreal, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. I carried the weight of secrecy like a stone in my chest. But every time Jason caught my eye, every time his hand found mine under the table, I remembered why we were doing this. Not for pettiness, but for justice for the years they had stolen from me. As Rachel paraded through boutiques and my parents signed contracts with vendors, I kept my head down. I attended classes, laughed with friends, carried on as though my life was untouched. But inside I was trembling with anticipation. They thought they were orchestrating my wedding. In reality, they were financing their own humiliation. One night, lying awake in my dorm, I pulled out my journal and wrote a single line across the page. "They are walking into the trap, and this time I hold the door." I closed the book, pressed it to my chest, and let myself feel the steady beat of my heart. It wasn't fear anymore. It was power. For the first time in my life, the balance had shifted. They were no longer the ones writing the script. Jason and I were. And every dollar they spent, every arrangement they made, brought us closer to the moment when the curtain would rise and the truth would play out for everyone to see. I was nervous, yes. But beneath the nerves was something stronger, the calm certainty of someone who knows the ending before the play has even begun. My family thought they were in control. They had no idea they were already caught. The further my family sank into their illusion, the easier it became for Jason and me to play our parts. He had an instinct for performance, the kind that could make even the most outrageous lie sound like sincerity. One evening over dinner at my parents' house, he leaned back in his chair, looked at Rachel, and said with practiced awe, "You're really going to shine in this ceremony. I can already imagine people turning their heads when you walk in. Emily will be so proud to share the aisle with you." Rachel nearly glowed. She soaked up every word as though Jason had placed a crown on her head. My parents exchanged satisfied glances, mistaking his flattery for genuine admiration. To them, Jason wasn't just compliant, he was beginning to see Rachel as they saw her, the rightful star of the family. It was a dangerous illusion, and they drank it in eagerly. Of course, Rachel's appetite for attention only grew. By the end of that dinner, she was rattling off new demands, each more extravagant than the last. "If this is going to be done properly," she announced, "I need a dress from a real designer. Not just one of those names people recognize. And I'll need a full video team to capture my entrance, not just still photos. After all, it's not every day a family gets to showcase both daughters like this." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing at the absurdity. She had just reframed my wedding, as though it were a tribute to her, a celebration of Rachel's resilience and beauty. My mother nodded immediately, already pulling out her phone to check availability with a boutique that charged more for a hemline than most people paid for rent. My father chimed in with approval, talking about how a video crew would make the day something the whole town would remember. They saw this as an investment in Rachel's glory, a way to polish her image after her failures at school and work. Jason stayed perfectly in character. He gave a long, thoughtful pause, then sighed. "If that's what it takes for Rachel to feel honored, then it's worth considering. But I have to be careful with finances. I don't want Emily to think I'm being reckless." His words only made them more determined. My parents leaned forward with reassurances, promising they would cover the costs. Rachel clapped her hands together like a child promised a toy. And I I smiled sweetly, nodding as though I were the quiet, obedient daughter they had always wanted. I murmured agreement when asked, lowered my eyes when Rachel spoke over me, and feigned gratitude for their generosity. They believed I was passive, malleable, incapable of defiance. What they didn't see was the small notebook tucked into my bag where every transaction, every receipt, every new vendor name was carefully recorded. What they didn't know was that their so-called generosity was building a paper trail of their own obsession, one that would unravel them when the time came. Weeks passed in this charade. Rachel strutted through bridal shops with the confidence of royalty, turning up her nose at anything less than custom work. My mother fussed over swatches of imported silk, while my father signed checks with the flourish of a man convinced he was investing in legacy. Jason played his part to perfection, letting slip comments about how dazzling Rachel's entrance would be, how proud her parents must feel, how this was exactly what she needed to restore her reputation. Every compliment was a stone in the foundation of their fantasy, and every dollar they spent was another nail in the coffin of their credibility. Behind closed doors, Jason and I would laugh quietly, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief. "They really think this is about Rachel," he said one night, shaking his head. "They don't even see you. They're so blinded by their own narrative they can't imagine anyone pulling the strings but themselves." His words should have hurt, but instead, they gave me strength. For the first time, I wasn't the one being manipulated. I was the one watching them dig their own pit shovel in hand. It was a delicate balance. Too much eagerness on our part would raise suspicion. Too much resistance would slow their spending. So we walked the line, feeding their fantasy just enough to keep them reaching deeper into their wallets, just enough to make Rachel believe she was finally living the role she had always craved. Each time Jason praised her, she swelled with self-importance. Each time I agreed softly, she mistook it for surrender. One evening, after Rachel had demanded yet another luxury service, this time a string quartet to play during her entrance, I excused myself early, citing exhaustion. Back in the quiet of our apartment, Jason and I sat side by side reviewing the notes I had taken, flowers, video crew, designer, gown, musicians I listed, shaking my head. "They've turned my wedding into a production for Rachel." Jason smirked, leaning closer. "Which is exactly why it's going to collapse around them. The bigger the fantasy, the bigger the fall." I closed my notebook and let out a long breath. It was true. They had gone from manipulation to delusion, and they were too blinded by Rachel's demands to realize that every step was bringing them closer to humiliation. I felt a flicker of nerves after all the stakes were high, and their fury would be unimaginable once the truth came out. But beneath the nerves was a stronger current satisfaction. For once, the scales were tipping in my favor. As I drifted off to sleep that night, Jason whispered, "They're digging their own grave, and all we have to do is watch." I smiled in the dark, the sound of Rachel's triumphant laughter still echoing in my memory. She thought she was building her kingdom. She didn't realize she was standing on sand, and with each extravagant demand, each reckless check my parents signed, I knew the foundation was slipping further away. The fall was coming, and it would be spectacular. The weeks rolled forward, and the fantasy my parents had built for Rachel grew heavier and more elaborate. They were already buried in deposits, invoices, and extravagant promises, but somehow it was never enough. Each time Rachel smiled in the mirror of a boutique or spoke to a vendor, her eyes gleamed with a hunger I had seen all my life, the insatiable need to have more than me, to be brighter, louder, adored. I had thought I was prepared for anything, but then came the demand about the dress. It arrived in the form of a family meeting at my parents' house where I sat politely as Rachel scrolled through photos on her phone. My mother cleared her throat, her tone filled with the gravity of someone about to pronounce sacred law. "Emily, your sister still has the dress she chose when she played bride years ago. It would mean so much if you wore it on your wedding day. It's tradition, really, passing something down between sisters." I felt the words like a slap. Tradition. They had never cared for tradition unless it meant diminishing me. That dress wasn't a family heirloom. It wasn't a symbol of love or continuity. It was a cheap costume stitched together for a child's game, a prop from the very years when Rachel was celebrated and I was invisible. And now they wanted me to cloak myself in that memory, to erase my individuality, even on the most important day of my life. I forced myself to keep my face calm to avoid revealing the storm inside me. Later that night, instead of arguing, I sent a text message to my mother. "I won't be wearing Rachel's childhood dress. I respect your opinion, but I will be choosing my own gown for my wedding." The message was polite, firm, and most importantly permanent. A record that could not be twisted later into another story of me being difficult or ungrateful. When the little checkmark appeared to confirm it was delivered, I saved a screenshot. One more piece of evidence tucked away. Rachel, however, was not ready to accept defeat. A week later, as fittings began for my actual wedding dress, she made her move. My dress hung in a protective bag at the boutique, delicate lace and carefully chosen fabric waiting for its final adjustments. I had gone to try it on, but Rachel had slipped in earlier, armed with scissors hidden in her purse. She thought she was clever, thought she could cut a piece from the hem and ruin it beyond repair before I arrived. What she didn't count on was Aunt Marlene. By some stroke of fate, Marlene had decided to join me that day, arriving early to surprise me. She walked in just as Rachel bent over the bag, scissors poised. The sound of Marlene's sharp voice cut through the room like thunder. "Rachel, what on earth do you think you're doing?" Rachel froze, color draining from her face. For once, she had no ready excuse, no charming lie to cover her actions. Marlene stepped forward, plucked the scissors from her hand, and gave her a look so cold it could have cracked glass. "This is Emily's day. You may not care about her happiness, but I will not stand by while you try to destroy it." Without another word, Marlene marched her out, leaving the staff whispering in shocked tones. Jason and I learned of it later, and though my stomach turned at the thought of Rachel's malice, Jason only smiled. "This is perfect," he said. "She thinks she's clever, but we'll let her believe it worked." He produced a small scrap of fabric carefully torn from leftover material used for alterations and brought it to my parents' house. With just the right tone of exasperation, he showed it to Rachel. I tried to calm Emily down, but she's furious. She found the dress damaged. I don't know if she'll forgive me for not protecting it. Rachel's reaction was everything we expected. Her lips curled into a secretive smile, her eyes shining with smug triumph. She believed she had won. She thought she had stolen something precious from me, that she had forced me into vulnerability once again. It never occurred to her that Jason's words were laced with deceit, that she was being fed the fantasy she most wanted to hear. That night, Jason told me the whole scene, mimicking Rachel's satisfied expression until I couldn't help but laugh. But beneath the laughter was steel. The knowledge that my sister's cruelty had not lessened with age, that even when given everything she demanded, she still sought to take from me. It didn't break me, it steeled me. I had spent a lifetime absorbing her spite, a lifetime being diminished in her shadow. Now at last, I was done enduring. I sat at my desk and opened my journal, pressing pen to paper with deliberate force. "Rachel will not ruin this," I wrote. "Not my dress, not my day, not my future. The more she tries, the deeper she buries herself." I closed the book and felt a calm certainty wash over me. Her attempt to sabotage me had failed. Her arrogance had blinded her to the truth that the game had shifted, and she was no longer the one in control. She believed she had struck a blow. All she had done was prove beyond doubt that she deserved the reckoning that was coming. And as I prepared for what lay ahead, I knew this much: every scheme of hers, every demand, every twisted smile would only make the victory sweeter. The discovery of Rachel's attempt to sabotage my dress had ignited a fire in me that would not be extinguished. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking from her cruelty, I was watching her expose herself for what she was. With Jason at my side, I felt the shift. We weren't just defending ourselves anymore. We were preparing to end the cycle once and for all. The wedding wasn't simply about vows and celebration anymore. It was the battleground where truth would prevail. Jason's first step was practical but essential. He arranged for private security, discreet yet professional. The man he hired had worked corporate events and was trained to spot trouble before it erupted. Together, they drafted a list with photos of Rachel, my parents, and a few of their closest allies who might attempt to interfere. The instructions were clear. They were not to step foot into the ceremony if they tried anything unusual. If Rachel showed up in white, if my parents caused a scene, they were to be stopped at the door. The idea of seeing their faces when confronted by someone who knew their names and intentions filled me with a grim satisfaction. For years, they had used authority and intimidation to control me. Now, authority would stand between us, but it would be mine. In the evenings, Jason and I worked on something far more intimate: our vows. At first, the words came awkwardly weighted with all the years of silence I had endured. But slowly, the sentences began to take shape. Jason suggested weaving in truths not as accusations but as subtle acknowledgments. I wrote lines about choosing honesty over appearances, about finding strength in the places where I had once been silenced, about valuing love that did not demand sacrifice as proof. Jason spoke of loyalty in the face of betrayal of respect, freely given rather than taken for granted. We never named names, never pointed fingers. But anyone who listened closely would hear the echoes of my family's neglect in every promise we made. It was catharsis disguised as tradition, and it steadied my heart in ways I hadn't expected. Then came a jarring reminder of just how fragile the plan was. While reviewing the final details with the event staff, one of Jason's friends noticed something unusual. On the welcome board, where the couple's names were displayed in elegant script, Rachel's name had been printed alongside Jason's. Whether it was a careless mistake or a deliberate trick planted by someone who had slipped instructions to the printer, it sent a chill through me. For a moment, panic rose. Had they found a way to insert her into my day after all? But the staff caught it in time, corrected it, and promised to destroy the faulty signage before guests arrived. I tried to shake the thought, but the image of Rachel smirking beside Jason's name burned into my mind. Even in absence, she reached for my place. That night, I confided my unease to Jason. He took my hand steady as always. That sign was a warning, he said. Not that we're losing control, but that they're desperate. The tighter we hold to our plan, the more reckless they'll become, and that plays in our favor. His certainty grounded me. He had been right every step of the way. I let myself believe he would be right again. Aunt Marlene and Jason's closest friend Mark became our quiet guardians in the background. Marlene, ever the watchful presence, insisted on helping oversee the bridal suite, ensuring no uninvited visitors found their way near my dress or my belongings. She had seen too much to underestimate Rachel's capacity for pettiness. Mark, calm and dependable, volunteered to monitor the logistics, checking with staff, verifying names, making sure vendors stuck to the plan. They weren't just helpers. They were shields, people I trusted to catch the small cracks before they became disasters. Knowing they were there gave me a rare sense of peace. As the final week slipped into days, the weight of what lay ahead pressed on me. I had rehearsed walking down the aisle countless times in my head, but it wasn't the flowers or the music that haunted me. It was the knowledge of what might unfold just beyond the doors. Would Rachel come in a gown demanding her place? Would my father thunder forward with his usual bravado, insisting on family rights? Would my mother sob and wail, playing the victim when confronted? I didn't know. But for once, it didn't matter. Because no matter what chaos they brought, we were ready. The night before the ceremony, Jason and I sat together in the quiet of our apartment, our vows neatly folded in envelopes beside us. The dress hung untouched, guarded by Marlene. The seating charts were finalized. The security team had their instructions. Every piece of the puzzle was in place. Jason poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to me. "Tomorrow isn't just about us," he said softly. "It's about drawing the line. It's about showing them they don't own you anymore." I knotted the knot in my stomach, tight but steady. He was right. This wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation. As I lay in bed later staring into the dark, I pressed my palms together and whispered a silent promise, not to my parents, not to Rachel, but to myself. That tomorrow I would walk down that aisle, not as the overlooked daughter or the shadowed sister, but as a woman who had endured, fought back, and finally claimed her place. The thought carried me into uneasy sleep, but even in my dreams I stood taller than I ever had before. When morning came, I knew. This was no longer just a wedding. It was the day justice would walk beside me step for step. And for the first time, I was ready to meet it. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and bright, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing in my chest. I had expected nerves, but what I felt was something else entirely, a steady thrum of anticipation, the sense that every step had led me to this exact moment. Jason's calm presence steadied me. He had a way of grounding the chaos, and as he straightened his tie, he caught my eyes with a small, reassuring nod. "Whatever happens today," he whispered, "remember, we already won." Guests began to arrive in clusters, filling the courtyard with laughter and chatter. I peeked from behind the curtains of the bridal suite, heart pounding as familiar faces took their seats. Some had traveled long distances, their excitement radiating in every smile. For once, the atmosphere wasn't about Rachel or my parents' need to control the narrative. It was about me and Jason. But even as I tried to breathe in that joy, I knew it couldn't last unchallenged. The first ripple came when the hired security guard stationed at the entrance with quiet authority signaled with his earpiece. Jason's friend Mark slipped discreetly into the room where Jason waited and leaned close. "She's here," he said. Jason didn't flinch. Instead, he squeezed my hand and gave me the smallest signal, 2 fingers against his palm, the sign we had agreed on. Everything was going according to plan. Rachel had arrived, and not quietly. Through the murmurs of staff, I pieced together the scene unfolding outside. Rachel stepped out of a white rental car wearing a full bridal gown, layers of satin and lace spilling onto the pavement. She had gone all out, veil bouquet glittering jewelry that caught the sun as though she believed paparazzi would be waiting. Trailing her were a professional photographer clicking away with rapid-fire precision, and almost unbelievably a man in a tuxedo she introduced as her fiancé, a last-minute hire to complete the illusion of her own wedding day. It was grotesque theater, and she was the star of her own delusion. The guard moved swiftly, intercepting her before she reached the courtyard. He was polite, even deferential, but immovable. "I'm sorry, miss, you can't enter dressed like this. There's already a bride today, and this is her ceremony." Rachel's shrill protest carried over the hedges, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation inside. She demanded her right to enter, declared that the day was hers as much as mine, waving her bouquet like a weapon. My parents, hearing the commotion, rushed to her side. My father's booming voice joined hers, insisting there had been a misunderstanding, that Rachel was supposed to be part of the ceremony. My mother, ever dramatic, clasped her chest as though she were fainting, begging the guard to recognize their authority. But the guard held steady, guiding Rachel and her entourage to a side area away from the main entrance. To the guests already seated, it must have looked bizarre. An entire family locked in a standoff at the edge of the venue. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. From my vantage point, I could see guests turning their heads, their smiles fading into puzzled frowns. A cousin leaned toward another, gesturing toward the commotion. Someone in the back row pulled out a phone, angling discreetly for a recording. What was supposed to be my parents' triumphant moment of control was dissolving into a public spectacle. Inside, Jason remained a pillar of calm. He walked over to me, his eyes steady, his lips curling in the faintest smile. "It's fine," he murmured. "Everything is happening exactly as we knew it would." The warmth in his voice wrapped around me like armor. My hands, trembling only minutes before, stilled. The officiant, sensing my unease, asked quietly if I wanted to delay the ceremony until the situation outside was resolved. I shook my head. Delay would give them power, and I had no intention of ceding anything today. "No," I said firmly. "We start now." The music began, the familiar strains of the bridal march rising above the murmurs of confusion. My bridesmaids straightened, walking in pairs down the aisle. Guests who had craned their necks toward the entrance turned their eyes forward, unsure what to believe. My father was still outside, pounding at the door, but his absence only made the silence inside more profound. Then it was my turn. I took a deep breath, clutching my bouquet, and stepped into the aisle. For a moment, the entire scene blurred the rows of faces, the glow of candles, the soft rustle of dresses. All I felt was the floor beneath me and the steady gaze of Jason waiting at the altar. Behind me, chaos raged, Rachel shouting my parents, insisting the guard standing firm. But none of it touched me. With each step, I grew taller, stronger. The whispers I had feared for so many years no longer mattered. Let them gossip, let them speculate. Every eye in that room was on me, not because I had fought for attention, but because I had claimed my place. By the time I reached Jason's side, the fear that had shadowed me for so long was gone. In its place was a fierce, undeniable certainty. My family wasn't ruining my wedding. They were ruining themselves, and all I had to do was walk forward. Outside the ceremony doors, chaos erupted in a way even Jason and I could not have scripted better. Rachel, blocked by the guard and told firmly that she could not enter, snapped. Her shrieks carried across the courtyard, sharp enough to make some guests in the back rows turn their heads in confusion. When the guard did not move, she threw her bouquet to the ground and collapsed dramatically, her body sprawling across the entryway as if she had been struck down. Then came the sobs, loud guttural wails that echoed through the stone arches of the venue. She pounded her fists against the floor, kicking her heels, her veil slipping sideways until it tangled in her hair. For anyone watching, it was the tantrum of a child trapped in a grown woman's body. And people were watching. Several guests, unable to resist the lure of scandal, lifted their phones and began recording. My mother dropped to her knees beside Rachel, trying to console her, stroking her hair with frantic whispers. My father, red-faced with fury, turned on the guard. "Do you have any idea who we are?" he thundered. "This is our daughter's wedding. You will let her in, or we will sue you and this entire establishment into the ground." The guard did not flinch. He had been briefed, prepared for this exact confrontation. With a calmness that only enraged my father further, he said, "Sir, there is only one bride today, and she is already inside. Please step aside." Desperation bled into my mother's voice as she attempted to bargain. "Just a few photos. Let her walk the aisle before Emily. No one has to know. It's what was promised." Her words cracked on the last syllable, the weight of her pleading exposing the absurdity of it all. The guard shook his head. "There was no such arrangement here. You need to leave the entryway." It was the final denial, and with it, my family's dignity unraveled. Inside, I steadied myself as the music swelled. The officiant gave the signal, and Jason's father stepped forward, offering his arm. My own father, still outside, raging at security, would not be there to escort me down the aisle. And for the first time, I realized how right that felt. Walking with Jason's father wasn't a compromise. It was a declaration. I was not bound to the people who had tried to break me. I was stepping forward with a family that respected me, loved me, and chose me for who I was. As I began my walk, Jason turned slightly, his face calm, eyes locked on mine. In the small pause before I reached him, he leaned toward my parents, who had managed to push just close enough to shout objections through the doorway. His voice was clear, cool, cutting. "Do you have proof of any of this?" he asked. The silence that followed was deafening. They had none. Every scheme, every manipulation, every word of their plan had been spoken behind closed doors, whispered without text, without email, without a trace. They had believed secrecy protected them. Now that very secrecy was their undoing. My father's jaw worked furiously, but no words came. My mother wept harder, clutching Rachel, who still sat on the ground, her makeup streaking down her face in black rivers. Guests leaned toward each other, murmuring, piecing together what they had just witnessed. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others covered their mouths in shock. The whispers grew into low conversations, and soon the truth was taking shape in the crowd. It wasn't me who had disrupted this day. It was them. By the time I reached Jason and took his hand, the shift had already happened. The spectacle outside had cost my family the very thing they craved most: respect. No one was applauding Rachel's performance. No one believed their story of promises and entitlement. Instead, their unraveling was on display for all to see, and phones filled with evidence would ensure it could not be erased. As I stood beside Jason, ready to speak our vows, I felt a weight lift from my chest. For the first time in my life, my family's cruelty no longer held power over me. They had destroyed themselves in their desperation, and all I had to do was walk forward and let them. Inside the hall, the chaos outside faded into a dull murmur muffled by the heavy doors. I stood at the altar, Jason's hand in mine, the warmth of his grip steadying me as the officiant invited him to speak first. He pulled a folded slip of paper from his pocket, though he hardly glanced at it. His voice was steady, calm, but there was a weight beneath each word. "I promise to honor the truth of who you are." Jason began, his gaze fixed on me, though every guest leaned forward as if the vows were meant for them too. "To see the strength in you, not the lies others tried to convince you of. I promise to protect the light in you even when others tried to smother it, and to never take for granted what you have fought so hard to hold on to." His words weren't explicit, but the message was clear. People shifted in their seats, glancing at one another as they absorbed the meaning. The injustice that had once been whispered behind closed doors now shimmered in the open air, cloaked in the solemnity of wedding vows. A few guests dabbed at their eyes. Aunt Marlene pressed a handkerchief to her cheek. When it was my turn, I unfolded my vows, though my hands trembled only slightly. "I promise to love you freely without conditions, without demands," I said, my voice firming as I continued. "I promise to never let fear or bitterness rule me again. For too long I was told I was less. But standing here with you, I know I am whole, I am worthy, and I am free. You are not just the man I love, you are the proof that happiness is possible even after years of doubt." A hush fell over the room. It wasn't just a vow, it was a declaration, a reclaiming of everything that had been denied me. The officiant's smile softened as he asked for the rings, and Jason slid mine onto my finger with hands steady as stone. Outside, the noise swelled again, only this time it wasn't Rachel's voice carrying into the room. A faint scuffle could be heard as the guard finally escorted her from the entrance. She screamed a high-pitched wail that broke into incoherent sobs as she was half-carried, half-dragged away. My mother's voice followed, frantic and pleading, as she chased after her daughter. And then my father's heavy footsteps echoed across the stone as he stormed away, entirely too furious even to pretend civility. The officiant paused, giving me the choice to wait. I shook my head. "Keep going," I said quietly, and he nodded. The ceremony moved forward smooth and uninterrupted, as if the storm outside belonged to another world entirely. Marlene caught my eye from her seat, her expression full of quiet pride. She had been my anchor, my witness through all the years of neglect, and now she sat surrounded by Jason's friends who clapped her shoulder and offered her tissues when her eyes welled with tears. The sight filled me with warmth. I was not alone. I never had been, though my parents had done everything to make me believe otherwise. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and Jason lifted my veil with a tenderness that melted the last remnants of fear in me. His kiss was met with a swell of applause, louder and more genuine than I had ever expected. The sound drowned out the remnants of chaos still lingering outside. For once, the story wasn't theirs to tell. It was mine. As we turned to face our guests, hands entwined, I felt something loosen inside me, like a knot that had been tied since childhood finally came undone. This wasn't just the end of a ceremony. It was the end of years of silence, dismissal, and cruelty. It was the beginning of a life that belonged to me. I smiled, not the forced smile I had worn through countless family events, but one that rose from deep within. I had stepped into this day unsure if I could truly rise above the shadows of my family. But with Jason at my side, with Marlene's love in the crowd, I knew. I had taken back my life, and I wasn't giving it up ever again. For a brief moment after the ceremony, there was silence. My family had slunk away in disgrace, and I thought perhaps they would lick their wounds quietly. But Rachel had never been one to accept humiliation in silence. The very next morning, her voice returned, this time amplified by social media. On her account, she posted a long, dramatic message. In it, she accused Jason of betraying me, claiming he had led her on for months and then abandoned her at the altar. She painted herself as the true victim, insisting that I had plotted to humiliate her out of jealousy, calling me cruel, selfish, even unhinged. Her words dripped with venom, the familiar language of someone rewriting the story to make herself the star. Within hours, a few sympathetic acquaintances commented with condolences, but the majority reacted with disbelief. The inconsistencies were obvious, and her performance rang hollow. Jason had been prepared. He calmly uploaded a recording we had saved from weeks before the dinner where my parents and Rachel had first unveiled their outrageous demand. Their voices were clear, unmistakable, asking for Rachel to walk the aisle in my place. The moment Rachel declared it was her right to feel like a bride before me, the smug certainty in her tone was undeniable. Jason captioned the post simply, "For anyone confused by recent claims, here is the truth." The impact was immediate. Whatever credibility Rachel had tried to scrape together evaporated. The recording spread quickly among family and friends, shared and reshared with captions like, "Now it makes sense," and "unbelievable." Rachel's accusations collapsed under the weight of her own words. That same day, Aunt Marlene stepped forward in the extended family group chat. She had remained quiet long enough, and now she spoke with the authority of someone who had witnessed everything. She described the years of favoritism, the manipulation, the financial betrayals, and finally the insanity of the wedding day. She made it clear that Jason and I had not exaggerated a thing. "Emily has carried more than her share," Marlene wrote, "and for once she has every right to draw the line." One by one, cousins and uncles and aunts chimed in, offering words of support. Others expressed disgust at my parents' behavior, some even vowing not to invite them to future gatherings. The isolation that Rachel had once tried to force on me now wrapped itself around her and my parents instead. If the recording had been the nail in their coffin, the video that surfaced next was the hammer that sealed it. A guest had recorded Rachel's tantrum outside the venue, the screaming, the collapsing onto the ground, the sobs muffled against the stone floor. Uploaded to a popular forum, it spread far beyond our circle of acquaintances. Strangers who had never heard of us laughed, shared, and commented in disbelief. Bridezilla wannabe, one headline mocked. The sister who lost her mind at someone else's wedding, another read. Her name wasn't famous, but her meltdown was now part of the internet's permanent memory. Rachel's attempt to portray herself as the injured party backfired spectacularly. Instead of sympathy, she became a punchline. Her employers saw it. Her neighbors whispered about it. Every time she left the house, she risked someone recognizing her from the video. For someone who had spent her life demanding attention, the wrong kind of spotlight was unbearable. Meanwhile, Jason and I found ourselves surrounded by a different kind of attention. Messages poured in, congratulations, reassurances, even apologies from relatives who admitted they had once believed Rachel's lies. Friends invited us out to celebrate, raising glasses not just to our marriage, but to the victory we had won against years of cruelty. At family gatherings hosted by others, we were greeted warmly while my parents' and Rachel's names were conspicuously absent from the guest lists. For the first time, I no longer had to explain myself. The truth had spoken for me, captured in recordings and Marlene's testimony in the viral video of Rachel's undoing. And for once, everyone believed it. As Jason and I sat together on the porch of our new home a week later, I scrolled through the messages of support and felt something I had never known in my own family: validation. Their attempts to twist the story had failed. Their names were tainted. And mine was finally free. In the end, they had tried to destroy my wedding to protect Rachel's pride. Instead, they destroyed their own reputations. And I, at long last, stood unbroken. In the days that followed, the fallout only grew sharper. Rachel tried once more to regain control of the narrative, but the world had already made up its mind. The video of her screaming in a bridal gown at the gates of my wedding spread like wildfire, reshared by strangers who had no connection to us but relished the spectacle. Headlines called her the meltdown bride and the sister who couldn't let go. Employers are cautious about reputation, and Rachel's company was no exception. Within a week, she was quietly dismissed. They claimed downsizing, but everyone knew the truth. No one wanted a public relations disaster attached to their brand, and Rachel had become exactly that. Her attempts to find new work met the same wall. Applications disappeared into silence once potential employers Googled her name. The tantrum followed her like a stain she couldn't wash off. Even old friends, the ones who once indulged her dramatics, stopped answering her calls. In the eyes of everyone outside our immediate family, Rachel had become a cautionary tale, not a woman to be pitied. For my parents, the collapse was quieter but just as punishing. Thomas and Linda had always lived for appearances. They thrived on community events, neighborhood dinners, church functions, where they could boast about their golden child. But after the recordings and the videos surfaced, invitations stopped arriving. Neighbors who once waved now turned away. At the grocery store, people whispered as they passed. They weren't villains in the eyes of strangers, but they were parents who had raised one. And in a town where reputation was currency, theirs was bankrupt. Jason and I, on the other hand, slipped into a life untouched by their disgrace. The morning after the storm had fully broken online, we packed our bags and left for our honeymoon. We didn't post our location, didn't answer calls, didn't even check the family group chat where the silence from my parents had become deafening. For the first time, I felt what it was like to live without the constant fear of their interference. On a quiet balcony overlooking the sea, I laughed with Jason over nothing at all, free in a way I had never been as a child in their house. At night, I wrote in my journal, the same journal where I had once poured out every hurt, every slight, every injustice. This time my words were simple. I no longer feel guilty. I did the right thing. And as I wrote, I realized it was true. For years I had carried the weight of doubt, wondering if standing up for myself would make me cruel, if refusing to bow to them made me selfish. But here, away from their voices, I felt only clarity. I had protected my happiness. I had protected my marriage. I had protected myself. When Jason kissed my forehead and pulled me close, I closed the book and set it aside. I no longer needed to document every wound. They no longer defined me. My life was no longer a story they controlled. It was mine, and mine alone. As the waves rolled against the shore below, I breathed deeply, the salt air filling my lungs. I wasn't the girl who lived in Rachel's shadow anymore. I wasn't the daughter who bent under the weight of unfair expectations. I was free. And nothing, not my parents' silence, not Rachel's tantrums, not the echoes of the past, could take that from me again. The last night of our honeymoon was painted in gold. Jason and I sat on the balcony of our hotel room, a pair of glasses between us, the horizon blazing as the sun sank into the ocean. The world was quiet here, far away from the voices that had once tried to dictate every choice of my life. For the first time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peace. Jason lifted his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. His smile was calm, steady, but his eyes burned with a pride I had never seen directed at me before. This time he said, his voice low and certain, "You didn't just survive. You won." The words settled into me like a final truth. I had carried scars from years of being overlooked, dismissed, and diminished. Survival had been my goal for so long that I'd never imagined victory. Yet here I was, married to a man who saw me fully free from a family that had tried to chain me to their twisted sense of loyalty. I raised my glass to his, and the crystal rang like a bell announcing the start of a new life. After he kissed me on the temple and leaned back, I pulled my journal onto my lap. Its pages were worn from years of desperate writing, lines upon lines filled with hurt, with confusion, with the words I never spoke aloud. I turned to one of the earliest entries written in a child's shaky script, No one listens to me. Maybe if I write it down, I won't disappear. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, remembering the girl who had scribbled those words under the dim light of her bedroom, hoping to prove to herself that her voice mattered. That girl had been small, scared, and convinced she would always live in someone else's shadow. But I wasn't her anymore. Somewhere along the way, through the pain, the betrayals, and the fight for my own dignity, I had become someone stronger. Jason glanced at me, tilting his head in question. I smiled softly and shook mine. "I think this is the last time I'll write in here," I told him. He didn't argue. He just nodded as if he had known this moment was coming. I closed the journal slowly, pressing it shut with both hands. The sound of the clasp clicking into place echoed louder than the waves below. It was the end of something, but not a loss. It was the closing of a chapter that no longer defined me. I didn't need the pages anymore because I wasn't surviving day by day. I was living. Jason reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "So what happens next?" he asked. I looked out at the sea, at the last streaks of pink vanishing into the dark. "We write the rest together," I said simply. We sat in silence, sipping the last of our wine, the night deepening around us. I thought of my parents, of Rachel, of the chaos they had brought to my life. For years I had wondered if they would ever face consequences, if justice would ever come. And now, watching the stars flicker into view, I realized it had. Not in a courtroom, not with headlines or verdicts, but in the truth being revealed in their lies, unraveling in the peace I now held in my own heart. As I set my glass down, a final thought rose within me, clear and unwavering. Justice doesn't always wear a robe, sometimes it wears a wedding dress. And that, my friends, is how a wedding that should have been ruined turned into the sweetest revenge. For years, Emily lived in the shadows of favoritism, lies, and manipulation. Her parents put her sister on a pedestal, and Rachel demanded everything, even Emily's wedding aisle. But on that day, with careful planning, quiet strength, and a little poetic justice, Emily walked down that aisle as the only bride, while her sister melted down outside for the world to see. And instead of shame, Emily finally found freedom. Stories like these remind us that justice doesn't always come in a courtroom or from a judge's gavel. Sometimes it comes when truth exposes lies, when cruelty destroys itself, and when the person who was pushed down for years finally stands tall. Emily didn't just survive her family's cruelty, she won. And that victory, that smile as she toasted her new husband while her family slunk away in disgrace, is the kind of ending that makes every moment of pain worth something. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think about Emily's choice to play along and let her parents and sister dig their own hole? Would you have done the same, or would you have confronted them head-on before the wedding day? Do you believe revenge like this is justified, or do you think Emily should have taken the high road and walked away without the final sting? There's no wrong answer, but I would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story of drama, betrayal, and long overdue justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. We share stories that make you gasp, make you angry, and most importantly, make you cheer when the underdog finally gets the upper hand. Don't forget to like this video if you felt even the slightest bit of satisfaction watching Rachel and her parents fall apart, and share it with someone who loves a good story of poetic justice. And remember, justice isn't always wrapped in law books or delivered in court. Sometimes it walks down the aisle in a white dress, smiling finally free.